In 1998, as a young major in the Indian Army, I was posted to Ladakh. I had access to some of the most beautiful riverfronts, mountains, and sunsets. I remember walking along this track, thinking inwards and asking God, why have you sent me here? There were obviously no answers. But a few months later, when I was on another assignment in Baroda, I suddenly received a call. I suddenly received a call to head back to Leh immediately because of an emergency, and I boarded a flight that evening and another one in the morning and landed in Leh. This was the last week of May 1999. I had my troops waiting for me, about 100 of them who were under my command then. These were people from different engineering streams and responsible to maintain and repair the equipment that the army uses. There was a frenzy in Leh, and I was asked to immediately leave for Kargil. It was a long drive. We drove for the next 12 hours to reach Kargil in the dead of the night amidst heavy enemy shelling from all sides. There were thousands of more troops like me who had driven into Kargil that night, and we had no place to park ourselves. My men needed rest, so I asked them to, we just found some gap somewhere, and I asked them to dig in for the night while I went to the Kargil Operations Control Center to meet my commander. As I walked into that underground bunker, on the wall, I saw those small-scale maps that had dozens of enemy markings on it, which basically indicated that those posts had been intruded into by the Pakistani army. I met my commander, who told me, Rohit, go to a place called Batalik and make sure that the guns keep firing, because if they don't, we will lose our men. With this 15-second briefing, I walked out of the operations control room, and the next day morning, we drove to a place called Batalik along these routes that looked as treacherous as you see here. Many stretches of this road are under direct observation of the enemy. So you have to negotiate certain, distances within specified periods. Otherwise, it is almost certain that they will bring fire on you. And at the same time, you cannot ask the drivers to rush, because you cannot ask the drivers to rush because of the safety of the men and equipment. So all we could do was pray and look for the gun positions that we were responsible to locate that evening. There were no mobile phones, there were no communication systems in those times. Later that evening, I had reached Batalik, and we had located the gun positions along the road. These are Bofors weapon systems, very advanced, very rugged, which were now firing into the enemy territory almost non-stop. These guns are capable of firing 20, 30, 40 kilometers into the enemy territory to make sure that the enemy keeps their head down before the foot soldiers go and do any operation or attack there. There were several other guns as well, but they were now firing hundreds of rounds every hour, and 24/7. And we knew for sure that the extremities that these weapons were now being exposed to would result in failure sooner or later. Many of these equipment need regular maintenance tasks and the repairs as time goes by. Over the next couple of days, we had to hit the ground running. There weren't enough spares, there weren't enough tools, there weren't enough literature, there wasn't enough trained manpower. But those excuses do not stand in the battlefield, and we had to really innovate on our feet while the battle was on. The guns began to fail, not surprisingly, many of them due to wear and tear, and we were like doctors in the operation theater working on live guns. And whenever we had small windows of time to carry out certain tasks, we would replace assemblies, bring in spares, or do whatever little that was possible. We went to the extent of flying some of these assemblies out to Chandigarh and Patiala to get them serviced and airlift them back. These are generally not allowed because these equipments are very specialized and they can only be attended to in very controlled environments. But when it is a war, everything is fair. We were even trying to manufacture little cut metal and manufacture little spares that were possible out in the field. We do have some provisions to do that because sometimes a small bolt or a small nut can damage the entire assembly and the entire gun would not work. What was important was that these guns keep firing and that there is no break. I have spent many days and nights, almost the next 4 5 weeks that we spent there. We were most of the time on these gun positions, doing what we were required to do. What was disheartening, though, is that in those 4 weeks, the army was not making enough gains. We were not regaining our posts. The war started in the end of May 1999, and almost until the mid of July, we were struggling while the losses continued to happen. The losses meant that there would be direct hits. They were shelling from the enemy side, just as we were shelling on their side. There would be accidents. There would be all sorts of casualties. The vehicles got damaged, the guns would get damaged, and all of that had to be taken care of. I would meet many of my friends, my course-mates, juniors, seniors, colleagues from the training academies and the service. We would meet like brothers born of different mothers, hug each other, because I knew that some of them would be going into the operations later that night or the next morning. Many of them went on to become heroes. Some got injured for life, and some were lucky to come out safe, like I did. Almost 7 weeks into the war, the Indian Army started to make reasonable gains, and we started to regain our posts. The cost that we paid was pretty heavy. We officially lost about 500 men. I don't know the exact figure, but in these operations, and the impact of the war in terms of the injuries that it caused and the financial and other costs that we had to bear as a society, as a country, are indeed innumerable. I was lucky to have come out alive from the war. Many years later, I left the army and transitioned into the industry. And I would often wonder again, asking God, why did he send me there? What was the role of this war in my life going to be for the rest of my life? While I made a transition into a career in the private sector, I remember many of the significant introductions I made or the job interviews that I took. The war remained a central theme in my story, and in some way, I'm sure it helped me climb the career ladder. Things went on, and many years later, as we all in our middle years get busy, building a life, raising a family, securing our future, I did all of that until a point came where I thought that wasn't just enough. And in one of these solo vacations where I was wanting to, spend time reflecting on what rest of the life was going to be like, I did realize that I had begun to believe that whatever had happened for the good, whether it was a war or everything else that happened later. I was also very grateful to be alive, to have come out alive of a theater like that. And in one of the solo vacations that I was taking, this is Banaras. I remember this is Diwali of 2019, and we were attending the Aarti, Maha Aarti, and there are tens of thousands of people there, and there are hundreds of boats jostling with each other for space. And while I'm there, I meet a stranger who comes to me and for no reason tells me that he runs a school up in the Himalayas and that I must go and have a look. Now, I am not sure. I asked God again, why are you doing this to me? And I'm not even sure why he has come up to me. But a few months later, I drive up to one of the farthest districts in the country. It is called Uttarkashi. It is a small school that he wanted me to see, and I'm there. I meet with the children. I meet with the teachers. I spend some time with them. While I find that the sparkle in the eyes of the children are the same all over the world, they're universally the same, but I'm not very happy with the quality of education that is being doled out to them. This is a small private school that they were running, and I could see that communities there cling on to private schools because in an effort to avoid government schools about which they're not very happy. So I get introduced to the kids and the teachers, and as I'm flying back to Mumbai, that is the week when the COVID lockdowns were announced. And so while we remain cut off physically for almost the next 2 years, these kids remain in my heart. We remain in touch. I remain in touch with the teachers, with the kids, only to realize that for all of these 2 years, there was no learning for them. It was a complete blackout because they had no access to any digital means or online resources like their more privileged counterparts. So on the other side of COVID, as travel opened up, the first thing I did, this is uh, March on this side of COVID 2022. So I traveled to Gangotri and I'm there. I just want to see what's going on in these children's lives. And as I stand there, I also know for sure that if there is something that needs to be done, it needs to be done now. There is no going back, because if I did, I would get caught up in everything else that goes on in life, and this would remain deep down in my heart just a thought. Most of these private schools shut down during COVID, and many of them did not recover because there was no fees paid, no salaries paid, and people did not come back. Some migrated and they simply collapsed. So I knew that this was the time. I'm standing there at Gangotri. This was the point, and I see the Ganges flowing down from there, and I just know that this is the point. Take a decision. Either you start flowing freely like the Ganges has served mankind for thousands of years. Either I flow like that, or I go back to my 9 to 5 job. So as you can guess, I went back to Bombay. I took a break from my career, and we started a campaign called Vidya Dan with a tagline that said, Vidya Dan provides children in underserved remote areas with a chance at good education. It takes very little and every drop counts. This is the conversation that I started to have with neighbors, friends, relatives, family, strangers in the lift, anywhere and everywhere. And soon enough, people began to respond. They responded better than I had thought. We started to get sponsorships for children, and very soon I knew that there was no going back. Very soon, we started getting the books and the stationery and the notebooks and everything, all the other resources that are essential to sort of revive a school that was dying. I started to get a lot of interest from volunteers whom we started to fly down to do workshops, summer schools, winter schools, and other interventions there. And I could see the smile come back, life come back into the faces of those 100 children from there. From then, there has been no looking back really, because the more effort we put in, things change. It is very difficult to survive in this part of the country. Let me tell you, things that we take for granted while we live in the cities are almost impossible to execute there. Over the next few months, we could create a computer lab. We could get interactive screens. I fought with the telecom agencies and got a fiber running across the Ganges into the school to get an internet broadband. We now have 12 to 15 volunteers from across the country, actually even outside the country, who take regular online classes with our children. We could manage to get a school bus. We created a library carrying books carton by carton from Dehradun up into the hills, sometimes in our own private vehicles. The school started to run cultural programs. We started to do online shows and hikes and treks and everything else that a regular school is supposed to do. Now, I spend much of my time there, praying, learning, eating, and playing with the children, and only to thank God for having sent me there. Now, when I turn inwards, I don't ask God why He sent me there. I just thank Him for sending me there. And I know for sure that we will continue our efforts to expand and improve the school. We are now in the process of raising funds to create a full-fledged CBSE school in that area, because none exists. And it is a tremendous amount of work. I have had friends and acquaintances get in touch with me, and some of them have joined me either as advisors, mentors, trustees, whatever. And we are in the process of putting that plan together. I get inquiries from across the world now. There are foundations and NGOs that show interest in wanting to do some work in this area, and to be able to build a school of the kind that we are thinking, and change the lives of these children. I still take my walks. I still have access to some of the most beautiful hills, rivers, and sunsets in the world. The great thinker, Jiddu Krishnamurthy, says, truth is pathless land, which essentially means that each one of us needs to make our own choices in life to get to where we are, to make life fulfilling and complete. I made these choices, and as a result of which, I have access to like I said, some of the most beautiful mountains, rivers, and sunsets that I ever thought I will see. That, to me, ladies and gentlemen, is the ever changing yet never changing idea of truth. Thank you so much for listening to me today.